Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, joined today by Lindsey Granger. Lindsey, great to see you.
How you doing, Amber? What's going on?
Doing well.
Well, we have a lot to talk about today. Like Amber said, coming up on Rising, I'll discuss how a Republican lawmaker was relentlessly booed at a town hall.
Also, a Democratic Congresswoman is facing heat after she said she was a proud Guatemalan before American.
And President Trump is threatening to federalize D.C. again.
But first, what do the Clintons, 2 former FBI directors, and 6 former attorneys general have in common? Well, they've all been subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee, all related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Now, the flurry of subpoenas were handed down Tuesday after members of the subcommittee last month voted to subpoena those 10 former government officials, plus former Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell. Committee Chair James Comer did agree to delay Maxwell's deposition until after the Supreme Court considers her petition to overturn her sex trafficking conviction. Most notably left off the subpoena list is former Trump Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, who was the federal prosecutor that approved a controversial non-prosecution agreement with Epstein back in 2008. The deal allowed Epstein to serve a minimal time in prison and shut down the federal investigation into his alleged sex trafficking ring. It also shielded his alleged co-conspirators from future prosecution. Acosta defended the deal in 2019, saying this.
That plea versus going to trial, how do you weigh those two if going to trial is viewed as the roll of a dice? The goal here was straightforward. Put Epstein behind bars, ensured he registered as a sexual offender, provide victims with the means to seek restitution, and protect the public by putting them on notice that a sexual predator was in their midst.
Conservatives on social media were quite gleeful after the subpoenas were announced. Conservative commentator Nick Sortor taking to X saying, in part, if they don't show, lock them up. That's what they did to Steve Bannon. And Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna echoed that sentiment on Benny Johnson's podcast yesterday.
Charges, which we can vote on, and then the DOJ can prosecute, which I'm sure Pam Bondi would love to prosecute some of these people. So I doubt anyone would have the backbone to try to stand up to a subpoena, try and get information on Jeffrey Epstein.
Meantime, the House Oversight Committee also voted to order the DOJ to turn over the, quote, full, complete, unredacted Epstein files. The DOJ now has until August 19th to hand those files over. Depositions on the 10 former government officials begin with former Attorney General Bill Barr on the 18th. So a lot to unpack here. I mean, this pretty much guarantees that this issue is not going away. Love it or hate it, I think it's transcended from this partisan thing to now there's actual interest, even if people weren't interested in it, let's say a year ago or 6 months ago. Now it's a thing where hopefully they start to uncover some information and we get everything that people are asking for. Everyone should come to the table. Everyone on that list should come to the table and speak, including President Trump, including Alex Acosta, I think. I don't think those two should be left off the list of people in the conversation if they're trying to get to the bottom of every known associate that was listed more than one time, let's say, in these files. I think we should have the exposure that everyone's asking for.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, they're not going to subpoena Trump, but I'm sure that they're having conversations behind closed doors about his relationship with Epstein. But I agree that Alex Acosta should definitely appear. We've asked the House Oversight Committee why his name was excluded from this list. They have not gotten back to us on that. And there's been some interesting contradictions around what actually happened with that plea deal, where the Daily Beast reported that Acosta once told someone that he was told to back off of prosecuting Epstein by high levels of the government because he was an intelligence asset. Since then, Acosta has kind of said that that didn't happen.
Didn't say that, yeah.
Say that.
Convenient.
So yeah, it is really convenient. But I think this is good news overall. It says to me that the Trump administration is taking the concerns of Americans and the Trump base seriously over their mishandling of releasing the Epstein files. Todd Blanche, of course, meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell and having that hours-long conversation with limited immunity. And apparently in that conversation, they talked about 100 or more known associates of Jeffrey Epstein. So it feels like we're making at least some progress.
The problem with that Todd Blanche meeting is obviously, and to reiterate his connection with President Trump, that he was his personal lawyer, in the situation that he was in with the hush money case. I think that we have to ask what the terms were of that agreement that Ghislaine Maxwell now, it feels like, as an outsider looking in, she's walking around a little bit more laxed with the request that we saw come immediately after, not only from the Supreme Court to review her case, but also obviously reaching out to President Trump and confirming that with her lawyer for a pardon, but all the things that she's doing that anybody who was in jail would do, but also just understanding like this is still a predator, somebody who's a convicted felon, and we want to make sure that people that were involved in this are implicated, but also not allow someone free just because they give information that could be lies because they perjured so much. I also want to make sure that as we're looking at this list of people called to testify before Congress, all the names made sense to me besides Hillary Clinton, which felt extremely partisan. I didn't understand. I mean, I think when she was subpoenaed, she has no known direct connection to Epstein. Her husband does.
Well,
and she's
she
kind of
the island, though.
But she's kind of dragged into this. There's no connection in the same ways that President Trump, like these are like, it raised questions like what was her direct connection in what we're seeing come out? I don't know that being in a picture, we're not calling Melania Trump up to the stage, who also was in the pictures with Epstein and traveled with President Trump there. So I just think that we have to make sure that we're not turning this into a circus.
Well, I think the difference is that Hillary Clinton admitted to visiting Epstein's island, whereas Trump and Melania had been in pictures with Epstein and had flown on the Lolita Express, but only from Florida to New York and with their families around. The Clintons were much closer to Epstein's alleged crimes in that they were flying on the Lolita Express to the island. So that's why I think it's actually perfectly reasonable to call in Hillary Clinton if you're going to call in Bill. And I'm going back to the issue with the Ghislaine Maxwell request from the Supreme Court,
Yes.
et cetera. She also said that she does not support releasing her grand jury testimony,
Right.
because she said it would be a detriment to her case that she's presenting to the Supreme Court, which it's like, come on, lady, you don't get a say here, right? Like, naturally,
This is not convenient
right?
for me.
I'm sure she doesn't want the grand jury testimony released because it probably looks really bad for her and explains why she is serving this long sentence in prison. So at a certain point, you have to say, you don't get to make the demands here. We're the ones in charge.
And that's why I said she feels very comfortable,
Right.
Which is the sense that I'm getting just from the last few statements that have come out from her lawyer. But I also think, we have to just look at this whole thing and see, why are we not releasing files from the Treasury Department?
Sure.
Don't you think that would be an interesting way to follow the money? I mean, money usually tells the answer to most questions. So what was it spent on? Where was it going? These are all things that are in the Trump administration's possession. And I think a key detail that can easily be released as opposed to sending everyone elsewhere. And simultaneously, it doesn't have to be and or, it can be both. I think that is a big, huge step that maybe that MAGA base should ask about more. Why won't we see these, why can't we follow the money immediately and everything else follow?
Well, I completely agree, Lindsey, because one of the biggest mysteries of Jeffrey Epstein is how he made his money, how he got so wealthy.
No one understands the
right?
connection.
And there's always been this this allegation or this sentiment that he was perhaps blackmailing the people who had been involved in the sex trafficking or were clients of his to invest their money with him and allow him to manage it. But that's never been proven to this point based on the financial evidence that we've had access to, which is very, very little. So I agree. That's a really key part of the puzzle.
Yeah, so I think we're going to keep following this, but now we know at least through August, we're going to be talking about this pretty much every day.
Yes, that's right. All right, next up, Senator John Cornyn is urging the FBI to help locate and arrest the Texas Democrats who skipped town to stall an effort to redistrict in Texas. We'll be right back. Texas Senator John Cornyn asking the FBI to get involved with bringing back Democrats to Texas. Cornyn writing a letter to FBI Director Kash Patel asking the Bureau to locate and arrest Democrats who left the state. He alleges that they left to avoid a redistricting vote. As long as there is no quorum in Texas, there cannot be a vote. President Trump commented on this issue yesterday.
Well, I think they've abandoned the state. Nobody's seen anything like it, even though they've done it twice before. And in a certain way, it almost looks like they've abandoned the state. It looks very bad. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Should the FBI get involved? Should the FBI get involved?
Well, they may have to. They may have to. No, I know they want him back. Not only the Attorney General, the governor wants him back. If you look, I mean, the governor of Texas is demanding they come back. So a lot of people are demanding they come back. You can't just sit it out. You have to go back. You have to fight it out.
Now, Texas Governor Greg Abbott already ordering state police to find and arrest the over 50 Democrats that fled the state to delay votes on a redistricting map. That redistricting would give Republicans 5 more congressional seats. Democrats say this new map is a, quote, illegal voter suppression of Black and Latino Central Texans and a, quote, threat to democracy. Many of the Democrats are fleeing to Chicago or have fled to Chicago, where Governor DNC Chair Ken Martin and Governor J.B. Pritzker are in full support to stop this redistricting.
Is under assault. Voting rights are being completely violated. Now is not the time for one party to play by the rules while the other party has completely ignored them. So they've decided to cheat. They've decided to cheat, and we're going to respond in kind.
Donald Trump is a cheater. So is Governor Greg Abbott. And Texas Republicans are carrying out their will. And if they're going to cheat, then all of us have to take a hard look at what the effect of that cheating is on democracy. And that means we've all got to stand up and do the right thing. So as far as I'm concerned, everything is on the table.
Well, this has escalated very quickly, Lindsey, as the Republicans in Texas, including Greg Abbott and John Cornyn, now calling for those Democrats who broke quorum to be arrested. What do you think about the way this has been shaking out, right? The Democrats leave to prevent the vote, and now they're at risk of being arrested and possibly actually losing their state House seats.
Now, I want to be clear that I do understand the gravity of a job in Congress and why it's important to be working for your state in any capacity, and why it's important to be present to vote on things like the flooding that happened in Texas. But I do understand that this is more about redistricting than flooding. And I want to make sure that, you know, if people think they're doing the best thing they can to protect fair districts within their city and their state, I think it's important that we don't rush that and we allow the space to do that accurately, not 5 years in the middle of a census. So a census is once a decade. We're in 2025. It's supposed to happen next in 2030. And I think it's very rushed. And obviously to win the midterms, they've been very clear about that. And I know both sides have done this before in the past, but Texas is a rapidly diversifying state. And I think when we just look at the numbers, in the last few years, it's grown in 95% population between 2010 to 2020 for communities of color. So when you have that statistics, you have to understand that the maps haven't changed to represent a lot of those voices that are Black and Latino voices, and the districts haven't changed in any way, which is the whole point of the census. So when you think about the census doing its job and then trying to change that based on what politicians want, that's never ideal. And I also don't want to see this happening in a back and forth where now liberal states start to do the same thing and redistrict in a way that works for them, because redistricting is supposed to work for the voters to represent diverse voices, as opposed to just representing President Trump and what the interest might be for, one party or the other.
Yeah, I think the Democrats are going to end up on the losing side of this argument, because not only did they flee to one of the most gerrymandered states in the country, in Illinois, where Democrats have done exactly what they are accusing the Texas Republicans of doing by drawing these really ridiculous districts. I mean, there's literally a snake running through the middle of Illinois to split up another district to give Democrats greater representation. We see the same thing in California, where despite Republicans getting 40% of the statewide vote on an individual level, Republicans only get 1 out of every 5 congressional seats. And we also know that the census in 2020 made a mistake. In fact, they admitted that they had actually overcounted in Democratic states while undercounting in Republican states. And if they had gotten those numbers correct from the jump, you would have had similar increased representation like Texas is asking for, about 5 to 10 seats between Texas and Florida. that didn't happen. So apparently we're supposed to just wait 10 years, even though the census admitted they got it wrong, for us to correct that error. I think Texas Republicans are actually doing exactly the right thing.
Well, I think there's a concern, I think, historically, even in the last few years, like, for example, in Louisiana, the voting age population, around 33% of those people are black and 58% are white. And in 2021, state officials passed a congressional map that basically split it up to where black Louisiana natives only had one of the 6 districts in the state. And so it was, when you think about the rising population, I said again in Texas, it's one of those things where redistricting has had a historical negative benefit on negative implication on community of color. And so when you have that happening at the same time, no matter what the reasoning is, if it's not intentionally to be blocking certain groups or people, it ends up doing that when you're fighting for one party or the other, which is why I also would condemn it happening in those Democratic states and say that other Democratic states have a policy that they implement that they now want to get rid of for this back and forth, where they do this with an unaffiliated party and try to redistrict very unbiased and not in a way that affects them directly. And so I think we should start all looking at using the census properly, getting those numbers right, like you said, but also letting our institutions work. And that's why we have them set up, to work, and not for us to come in with man-made fixes that are really not proven themselves to be very helpful historically.
Yeah, I think the ideal would be to have independent bipartisan commissions that are drawing these maps as opposed to the state legislatures. But unfortunately, those are liable to be corrupted as well. I mean, in California, if you look at their so-called independent advisory council that draws the district, I think it's probably 9 out of 10 people on it are left-leaning or liberal, and you don't really have any Republican representation. So there has to be a way to make sure that those are also bipartisan and being represented in a fair way to the voters. And that just simply hasn't happened in most states. I mean, one of the few states that actually does have a truly bipartisan independent council is Maine, and they recently redrew their maps after the 2020 census, and even then basically took away one of the Republican, or at least toss-up districts, with Maine's second, where they basically drew a line around Aurora so that that could be included in the second congressional district and give Democrats a little bit of a boost. So this is an issue really all around the country, and even though there's a lot of outsized focus on Texas right now, it's very clear that this is going to be a nationwide, I think, issue that voters are going to be talking about because of this particular flashpoint.
And I also think it's one of those times where people are looking at elected officials and saying, what is happening? There are so many issues on the table, and then some are fleeing out of the state, some are arguing about redistricting, but there's real pocketbook issues, again, with both parties getting away from those things. And we have to remember that gerrymandering doesn't just affect a political side of the aisle, it affects real people, like which schools get funded and so much stuff. And so I think you have to remember, as we're starting to cut districts off in different areas, remember that there's real people that will be implicated by this back and forth. And there's also real people in Texas that need solutions for flooding. So both parties maybe should find a different time to do this that's less convenient for what happens in the midterms and more convenient for the people that you're representing.
All right, and up next, a Democratic Congresswoman is facing criticism after she said she was a proud Guatemalan more so than a proud American. Don't go anywhere. That's next on Rising.
Democratic Representative Delia Ramirez at a summit in Mexico City this weekend appeared to tell the audience in Spanish, quote, "I'm a proud Guatemalan before I'm an American."
Ramirez's comments sparked backlash on social media. Some on the left are attributing it to a mistranslation, but it appears that Ramirez has not denied that she did say she was a proud Guatemalan before an American. The official X account for DHS shared a quote from Theodore Roosevelt that reads, "There is no room in this country for hyphenated Americanism. Americanism is a matter of the spirit and of the soul. Our allegiance must be purely to the United States. We must unsparingly condemn any man who holds any other allegiance."
Now, Ramirez, who represents Illinois' 3rd Congressional District, pushed back, writing in part, quote, "Let's call it what it is. Today's attacks are a weak attempt to silence my dissent and invalidate my patriotic criticism of the nativist, white supremacist authoritarians in the government." She added, quote, "No one questions when my white colleagues identify as Irish American, Italian American, or Ukrainian American to honor their ancestry. I've consistently expressed pride in my heritage and history. Only those who believe America should not include the children of immigrants or be diverse would attack me, and Americans like me for honoring my roots. Look, American officials have to remember that what they say is on record, right? And, their public comments are going to be scrutinized. That's part of holding public office. But I also think that there's nothing wrong with being completely proud in your heritage, especially understanding that a lot of people who come from different countries, their parents, having several friends that are first-generation Americans, their parents migrated here, are still very proud of, let's say, being Ethiopian or Irish. Like, they talk about it all the time. And they have an opportunity to go places like go home when they say that and go visit people because there's a deep lineage there. And I think we should hold that up to a high standard. I think that this is a direct attack because how strong she is in her tone on immigration. And so obviously she's an easy target. If anyone else said this, maybe it would be less of an issue. But I don't think that she's un-American because she's proud of where her parents are from.
Yeah, to me, the issue was not with being proud of where her parents are from, but the idea of the supremacy of the Guatemalan part over the American part. When you are a congresswoman who is representing the United States of America, and these congresspeople take an oath, right, to have allegiance only to the United States first and foremost. And so that's why that comment, I think, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And to be honest, I didn't know who she was before I heard this comment. I did also, just getting back to the last segment, look up her district because she is in Illinois, and it is a little funky, that district that she's representing in terms of where the lines are drawn, but obviously a separate issue. But look, I think if there's anything that the Trump election told us, it's that people are really tired of this sentiment that people are not wholly American because their parents came from somewhere else. They want to bring back national pride, something that feels like it's been lost. I mean, Gen Z, for example, is the least patriotic generation that we have had in this country. And I think that's why her comment really sparked a lot of backlash.
And I think for the same group of people, which are Republicans that believe wholly in free speech, right? This should not be a conversation where she says something you don't like and now there are calls to denaturalize and deport her. That's not the country that we live in either, I think. And people have to be aware of the conversations that they're having because a lot of the immigration rules that want to be implemented at the highest degree, if we followed everything that the Trump administration would want to do, is take those people who parents may be migrated here and say that they are maybe not American because they were born here. That's one of the things on the table, right? You're born here, but your parents are not from here, so you need to go back. So at the same time, having that conversation, but then asking somebody whose parents were not born here, who then was the first generation American, to do something different. It's like, which one do you want? They're playing both sides of the aisle. And she still is a congresswoman who is very, active and, engaged in her district. But I think that also there needs to be room for her to be feeling a way about where she's from based on the current dialogue and the attempt to dismiss migrants in the way that they've been dismissed.
Now, unfortunately for her, I think she actually gave a lot of ammunition to the Trump administration trying to end birthright citizenship. Based on what I read about her, her parents were illegal immigrants and she was born in the United States, which is why she's a citizen. And when people are naturalized through birthright citizenship and then start talking about how they're more proud of their Guatemalan heritage than their American heritage, that's precisely why people have an issue with birthright citizenship.
Right. So it's like the cart before the horse. Like, who to blame, right? Is it one side or the other? Next up, town hall attendees relentlessly booed a Republican lawmaker, and he isn't the only one who's had to deal with this. I'll discuss much more about this in my lens. Stick around.
Welcome back. Lindsey, what's in your lens today?
I got a lot to talk about. So here's the thing. If you're going to name something the big, beautiful bill, you better be ready to defend it. And for Nebraska Congressman Mike Flood, let's just say his mic got flooded with boos. At a town hall with more than 700 fired up constituents, Flood tried to explain why he voted for Trump's sweeping domestic policy package. But he couldn't get a word in without being heckled. Take a look.
The other thing that the big, beautiful bill did, the only way we're going to get through tonight is if I get a chance to tell you why I voted, because ultimately I represent you.
And it didn't let up for more than an hour. Take a look.
Next slide, please. These are the other important parts of the one big, beautiful bill. Next slide, please. No taxes on overtime.
Awkward. Representative Flood blamed, quote, misinformation, but the crowd called him a liar. Yikes. And this kind of reception, it's what Republicans are dreading as they head home for their 6-week summer recess, the first time they're facing voters since the Trump bill was signed, the big, beautiful bill, into law on July 4th. Now, it's a hard sell, given what's in it. There's deep cuts to Medicaid, food benefits, and essential programs that working families rely on. A Quinnipiac poll showed 55% of voters are also against the bill. That number is loud and clear, just like those boos. So while town halls are usually a golden opportunity to connect with voters in your area, Republicans are finding them to be more like hot seats. Even Senator Josh Hawley warned colleagues that cutting essential programs could potentially politically backfire. And add to that lingering frustration over Trump's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein case, whereas the GOP main strategy has been deflect, 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 and lawmakers are bracing for even more political landmines. Now, Republican leadership knows this. Earlier this year, Representative Richard Hudson, who runs the GOP House campaign arm, urged members not to hold in-person town halls. And guess what? They listened for the most part. I assume that's why out of 35 House Republicans in competitive 2026 races, only Representative Brian Steele of Wisconsin has held a recent town hall. And yes, he was also booed. But the discontent is too widespread to mute. After his event, Representative Flood told reporters that showing up was, quote, part of the job, which is fair, but the town hall ended with voters chanting, quote, vote him out. So yes, points for showing up for sure, but no points for pushing through legislation that most people who voted for you did not want.
Yeah, interesting scenario at this town hall, right, where you had these loud boos. I mean, I do think that if you're going to ask Republicans to go out and do town halls, it would behoove you to then at least allow them the opportunity to speak. And instead, he was consistently shouted down by a lot of these people. And this was in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is a more Dem part of his district, of course, so not surprising that there was a lot of discontent. But one of the things that I found really interesting was he was explaining the Medicaid part of the big, beautiful bill, which requires able-bodied young adults to work in order to receive Medicaid benefits. And the crowd started shouting, no, we don't want that. We want everybody to get Medicaid. We want universal health care. And that's not consistent with where polling is at on the big, beautiful bill. While 55% oppose the bill overall, when you ask them about these individual portions of it, particularly the Medicaid work requirements, that's actually really wildly popular.
And I think that there can be nuance in these conversations, right? I think that there is an intention for Americans to work, and that should always be the goal, is that people should have the incentive to get to work and take care of themselves. But also our country is built in a way that when people fall in extremely hard times or get uncomfortable, and obviously there is issues within our current systems of people abusing. But for the most part, we have these protective layers to help people continue to have their livelihoods and continue towards the American dream, even in the worst of times. And so when you think about the number of millions of people that will lose health care, all these people were not frauds. All these people were not Democrats. Some of these people are Republicans and also really needed the help. And I think when you talk about those districts, even Republican senators like Josh Hawley that I named are telling you some of the people that are going to ultimately get hurt are also people that were blindly supportive of Trump, loosely supportive of Trump. Either way, this is not something that maybe you want to do in the same bill that provides tax cuts for people that are well or off in our society.
And the middle class and working class as well. I mean, the tax cuts that were extended were actually one of the largest tax cuts for the middle class in history. It was the corporate tax cut that was made permanent in 2017 by the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. One of the other things that I find interesting about these town halls is that we see a lot of mobilization from left-wing advocacy groups to get people to show up and create these scenes, basically. Early on in the Trump administration, there was a lot of talk about Republicans not doing town halls, and the ones who did show up, we found out that groups like Indivisible and Move On were actually gathering up people from their groups, their activists, to go there and shout down the Republican congressman. So at this point, I wouldn't do a town hall either if I know I'm going to show up and just get met by people who are trying to create this viral moment. Like, am I really talking to my constituents, or is this more of an astroturfed effort?
I can be fair and say hats off to Mike Flood for even doing this,
right?
Because, yeah, that's definitely a thing. But when I looked at the numbers, there was a line outside of the door before this event even started. I think there is a genuine interest in what he has to say, especially now that he's home for this recess, or not really a recess for people that are still going to continue working this summer, to actually engage. Part of the problem has been mostly for the Democratic Party, but also in both parties, the lack of a trust in your officials, but then also a lack of listening to the people that are voting for you. And so people feel left out by that conversation and think that decisions are being made in a way that doesn't directly affect what the voter is looking for. And so I do think that while there probably were people in there that had the intention to protest, there were still 700 people there total. And I don't think that a majority of them were there because they didn't want to hear an explanation. I do think that there actually is a call to explain how this big, beautiful bill is so big and beautiful, because this is not an objective statement, right? Some people really think this is a mess. And there's 2 polls. I didn't use the CNN poll, but that was even higher of the amount of Americans that don't want it. But I used the Quinnipiac poll in my lens. But I think it's important to just understand that there are some people that maybe were uncomfortable with this moving forward. And while there are plenty of winning issues for the Republicans at the moment, like immigration, when it comes down to the overall concept of it, I don't know that this big, beautiful bill was one of them. Even deficit hawks were uncomfortable with it. So I think no matter what, it can't just be blamed on one party trying to sabotage. There are real criticisms, which is why the bill was held up in Congress back and forth between the House and Senate for so long.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. There are obviously Republicans who are not happy with the bill either. And, I think looking at what Mike Flood did going out to this town hall, there's going to be other staff members in Congress working for Republicans, and I've heard this from some of them who'd say, you couldn't pay me enough money to hold a town hall at this moment because we know what's going to happen. So I think that's 100% fair. I do think the polls showing the overall opposition to the bill versus when people are asked about actually
the
measures
details
that are in it is
Yeah.
important, but also the overall numbers are probably what people are going to be thinking about when they head to the polls in the midterms. I wonder if this is going to kind of shake out like the Inflation Reduction Act did, where it was overwhelmingly unpopular as well. But then over time, people sort of moved on from that piece of legislation, as they often do with these reconciliation bills, where the details start to get lost as time goes on, and maybe they don't see a direct impact on their paycheck or what they're working on.
And campaign season is about to start for people in the midterms, so they have to consider that they have to face the fire. Whether you do phone calls or town halls, you have to talk to people.
That's right. Yeah, everybody should be doing that. All right, up next, President Trump is threatening to federalize Washington, D.C. after a prominent former DOGE staffer was the victim of an alleged carjacking. Stay with us.
By the way, I have to say that somebody from DOGE was very badly hurt last night. You saw that. A young man who was beat up by a bunch of thugs in D.C. And either they're going to straighten their act out in the terms of government and in terms of protection, or we're going to have to federalize and run it the way it's supposed to be run.
President Trump threatening to federalize our nation's capital again, this time after an alleged attack on a prominent former DOGE employee.
2 15-year-olds have been arrested for attempted carjacking, the victim being Edward Cornyn, who was employed by DOGE to slash federal bureaucracy but is now at the Social Security Administration.
President Trump posted on Truth Social after the incident, saying in part that crime is totally out of control in D.C., that local youths and gang members are attacking at random because they are not afraid of law enforcement, that these youths, sometimes aging between 14 to 16, should be tried as adults. His post goes on to say if nothing changes, he will federalize Washington, D.C.
Now, this comes as crime is actually down for our nation's capital. Look at these numbers here. Overall violent crime is down 25% from the same period last year. Also, crime in D.C. was down 35% in 2024 under Biden. So technically, that's not great for President Trump, who, you're the person in charge. He blames Biden for everything. It's kind of like, why did it get worse? And also, I think year to year, even looking like 2 years ago or from his first term, crime is down in D.C. So even though an issue becomes hyper-focused on, we don't want anybody to ever get carjacked or hurt. These are crime issues across the country, right? These are happening anywhere in the country. Carjackings happen probably every day, I'm assuming. So it's kind of like, I don't think a stance where the federal government needs to come in and kind of like redo D.C. because it's such and mind you, I've only been here for a short time. You actually live it and experience it. But from my purview, understanding and reading the stories, it's not like this rampant thing that's out of line with other states across the country.
Yeah, so I've been living in DC since 2012. I went to college here, and I've seen how the city has changed firsthand. And a huge part of the crime spike, of course, was due to the pandemic, but also there were a lot of policy changes made by the DC City Council, including a bill that was introduced by City Councilman Charles Allen that actually did give lighter sentences and penalties to youth offenders, and even for the most violent youth offenders. Things like people who had been involved in rapes and murders were able to get out of prison within 10 to 15 years if they had committed that crime under the age of 25. This has given a license to young roving gangs to go around DC and terrorize people. And although crime is down, as you mentioned, 35% last year, 25% this year, that's good news. It's really not at the level that it was when I first moved here, and certainly back in the 90s when the federal government did take control of Washington, D.C. and install a mayor who took care of crime, cleaned up the city, and really had the best run of any mayor that we've had in D.C. for the past 30 years. We've also seen that the youth crime rates in DC have not been tracking that general trend, and people are sick and tired of driving around the city and feeling like they could be the next victim of these carjackings, which really are more prevalent here than they are in a lot of other cities.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to emphasize before I get into anything else that obviously crime is terrible, and also people who commit egregious crimes, specifically like rape and some of the things that you named, should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I think when you talk about teens and like 14 to 16, there are always opportunities to overcharge people or mischarge people. And there are also implications that certain people that look a certain way may be the ones committing the crime, like we saw in the very publicized Central Park 5 instance, where these people are now acquitted of everything. And I think that that is a time where we have to make sure that we can look at situations and say these young teens' lives were ruined over something that they were not guilty for. And we have to make sure that we're not overcharging young children in instances where they perhaps didn't do anything, or perhaps they were around, or perhaps they were young, and perhaps they need an opportunity to grow. Because the difference between people with resources and without is that people with resources can do the same crimes, but their parents can help them get out of that situation. People without resources commit a crime and they never get out of the situation. So all I want is an equal justice system for people that look all different kind of ways and have different economic opportunities, and just be a legitimate way forward instead of just throw everybody in jail, because we know that technically does not work through many states that have tried similar programs.
Yeah, I wish we had more time to get into the Central Park 5 case, because they weren't acquitted. Their sentences were vacated, which they claimed was due to basically the sixth person, their DNA being finally matched to the person who had actually raped the woman. But all of these people did confess, including with guardians present, and had remarkably consistent accounts of what happened, even independently taking the police to the scene of the crime separate from one another. But obviously we can't really litigate that in this short of a segment. But one of the other things I wanted to mention about this incident involving the former DOGE staffer is that he should be heralded as a hero. According to the police report, which came out last night, the Daily Caller News Foundation got their hands on it, there were actually 10 people. They obviously arrested 2, but there were 10 to 12 people who were trying to carjack a young woman. And this guy saw what was happening, and despite being severely outnumbered and outmatched, decided to step in, make sure that she was able to get in her vehicle and be protected, put his body on the line, and took the beating for her. That is an American hero. And everyone who was saying nasty things about him because he has a silly nickname ought to apologize, because this guy is who we should be looking up to. That is inspirational, what he did for that woman.
100%. I think that that's one of those things that should be not partisan at all. Somebody tried to jump in to help another person, and carjacking is wrong, right? These are two, these are just
objective
facts.
truths.
Yeah, objective truths.
Yes.
Thank you. And I know we could talk about this forever, but my main point was acquitted. I used the wrong word, exonerated Central Park 5, but I also understand.
I wouldn't say that either.
But they were exonerated, and I think that the point is that when you talk about young kids that were in the process the way they were, and being held in rooms to speak for hours with parents that were working multiple jobs and underprivileged circumstances. Like, these are all instances where you don't have those same resources, where your mom, like if I have a daughter, I called off work, I would be wherever she was if she was getting in trouble. So there would be no questioning. There would be no lawyer not present to protect my child. Like, all these different things would happen because I have the resources. And so we're talking about kids from the middle of the city that didn't have the resources, that had parents that were working. And so I would never want these instances to happen to to bring it back to President Trump and what he said, where we are targeting a certain group and then they're affected by this federalization of DC in one particular way, because that historically has happened where one group is directly more affected than other groups. And sometimes people can get it wrong, is all I'm saying. And at 14 years old, when you get it wrong, this changes your life forever. You have no opportunities. Or like you see some of the people from the Central Park 5 incident are just starting to get their lives back.
Yes, I mean, the justice system does get it wrong sometimes. That is true. I think in the case of DC, where you have people who are involved in carjackings, theft, smash and grabs, and it's pretty obvious who the suspects are, then we should be really holding those people accountable. And the DC justice system has decided not to prosecute a lot of cases. Under the previous DC attorney, who was appointed by the president, he was not prosecuting 67% of cases. We've now seen a reversal of that under the Trump administration, which is good news, but I think more needs to be done to make sure that this city is safe, because what we've seen over the past 5 years has been, frankly, a disgrace.
And I think that, President Trump can do, instead of doing these press conferences about what he wants to do, maybe he should talk more to local officials that are on a different side of the aisle than him and have dialogue more often than criticism. We see both sides do it, right? We see the mayor talk to Trump a certain way, Trump talk back, and this is all on TV for show or on social media to say we disagree and this person's holding funding. And, we see that happening, but more conversation would probably be beneficial in this instance, right? Because he, like he says, I think in the same press conference when he was referring to Texas, is like, I have the checkbook. He said something about that yesterday. Like, I write, at the end of the day, the money comes from the federal government. He makes these decisions on which locations around the country receive which funding. And so this is just a conversation. I'm sure that local officials in DC would love to be supported more to figure out how to boost up and stop more crime. Every local official should want to do that. So a conversation is needed as opposed to a threat.
I mean, yes, conversations are good, but the local officials have failed. I mean, they haven't been doing their jobs. They've been repeatedly trying to pass these so-called criminal justice reform bills that lessen penalties for some of the worst offenders, that allow, teens like this, the 14 to 16-year-olds that are doing the carjackings, they get picked up, they get put back out on the street. They did a press conference, or a listening meeting, I guess, rather, with constituents around DC, I think it was 2 years ago now, and they had some city council members there and some members of the local community. And there was a parent there who was a foster parent, and he was fostering a child who had gone out and been involved in one of these carjackings. And he was very clear, my foster son, was immediately let go and brought back to my house. And now what am I supposed to do? Ground him after he just violently carjacked somebody? We need the justice system to do a better job of making sure that they are facing real consequences so that they understand what they're doing is wrong.
Yeah, definitely. There's always room for growth, but just as long as we're not over prosecuting kids is important.
All right, up next, plans for lunar nuclear power revealed. We'll tell you more. Don't go anywhere.
This is not a new concept. This has been discussed under Trump 1, under Biden, but we are in the race. We're in a race to the moon.
That was Transportation Secretary and Acting NASA Administrator Sean Duffy announcing Tuesday that expedited plans for the U.S. to build a nuclear reactor on the moon are in the works. Here's a bit more from Duffy.
To have a base on the moon, we need energy. And some of the key locations on the moon, we're going to get solar power. But this fission technology is critically important. And so we've spent hundreds of $millions studying, can we do it? We are now going to move beyond studying, and we have given direction to go, let's start to deploy our technology to move to actually make this a reality.
Politico first obtained and reported on the directive. It instructs the U.S. government to, quote, move quickly before terrestrial rivals. Duffy adds that the first country to succeed in building a reactor could potentially declare a keep-out zone. Per reports, China and Russia have announced in a handful of occasions that together they plan on building a lunar nuclear reactor by the mid-2030s. Reactions abounded on X. Midas Touch editor Ron Flipkowski posted on X, quote, our airports are a mess, but the good news is we have a reality TV show guy and a Fox News host who's in charge of that and a lot of other stuff while building a nuke plant on the moon.
Secretary of Energy Chris Wright is all about lunar nuclear. He took to X, writing, quote, the U.S. put people on the moon. Can we build nuclear reactors again? Absolutely. Is it going to be a challenge? Yes. But can we do it? With President Trump's bold leadership, Yes, we will. So I find this story really fascinating. At first blush, I was like,
what?
On the moon? That's crazy. And then I found out that previous administrations have been talking about this, that other countries are talking about it. And so it does seem like a national security interest of the United States to make sure that they're the first ones there to try to prevent these other countries. And there is a lot of concern that people have about nuclear power plants being next to their homes. It is obviously a very cheap, reliable form of energy, but if the disasters are few and far between, right? It's one of the safest, actually. But nobody wants to be in the line of fire if, God forbid, one of those plants does have an issue. So the idea of actually separating it from Americans and putting it on the moon, I guess, kind of makes sense.
I think, like I said, it can be brushed over like, what is this? So I'll start with the good stuff, right? This isn't just about going to space or exploration. This is about like infrastructure and resources on a new frontier, right? We always have to be building and on the forefront. Especially it rang my ears when I heard China and Russia are trying to do this first. It provides a security issue, national security, like things, they shouldn't be ahead of us. It's like the arms race all over again. It feels like that. But on the other hand, hearing this major announcement come from Sean Duffy at this time, I think there's validity in saying, hey, look around. You worried about the roads and the FAA and all the other things you have to monitor. Like maybe create a commission that could work on this, but you should be busy with telling us why people are flying out of airplanes on slides on the runway. I can name the incidents, right? Since the accident here in DC earlier this year, the unfortunate accident, there's been several incidents, and it seems like at the time there was a call to blame that on possibly DEI from our president. The conversation should be elevated and we should stop seeing this. And I know I've talked to FAA administrators and they've been like, the airlines are safe. These incidents are blown up because we're hyper-focused on them. But as the administrator there, Sean Duffy really has a responsibility to make the American public feel comfortable with getting around on land, in the sky, or on the ground. And he's talking about something that people don't see as an imminent issue. And when we talk about what voters want, like we have been earlier in the show, I don't know that people are calling for this right this second. And if they are, perhaps other people need to be tasked with doing this.
Yeah, I hope that the priority is on air travel. We have seen that become a mess over the past 5 or 6 years. Really, since the pandemic, a lot of air traffic controllers and pilots leaving the industry for a multitude of reasons, and staffing up those positions should be a priority for the administration. I've been generally fairly pleased with some of the results and actions we've seen as a result of that DC crash. We learned in the immediate aftermath that there had been a lot of reports on a public reporting system for pilots where they had talked about issues at DCA for years, particularly on runway 33 where the accident happened, and talked about helicopters flying too high and getting too close to airplanes and how many near misses there had been. Secretary Duffy added basically a ground stop on planes when helicopters are moving through the area now, which is good news, but obviously more should be done to make sure Americans feel comfortable with air travel.
Right, and we definitely have room to grow in that area. That does it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen on the go, we're available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you next time.